Hello and welcome to another episode of CollectaThoughts, the show where we talk about video games, and today I bring you The Longing, a game that has garnered some level of popularity due to its almost clickbaity title of a game that lasts 400 days or 9600 hours. Clickbaity because that's not really the reality of the game, but also once you understand the reality of the game, it is still quite a unique and interesting concept, so you don't immediately pass it off as a gimmick. But before we get into it, let me just explain what this game is about. Here we take control of Shade as he has to simply wait for 400 days for the king to wake up and rid the world of loneliness and sorrow. And yes, if you want to, your only job is to wait. Technically, the game doesn't actually give you any objectives, but you can, of course, explore the cave you find yourself in, and through that, maybe find your own objectives or at least, help your little character out. And that's kind of a big part of it, as throughout this journey, I definitely feel like I started to connect quite a lot and caring for the character of Shade. He's a very innocent character. He's never been outside. He doesn't really know anything outside of this cave. And so as you explore the cave with him, you do kind of feel attached to him. And one of the ways the game does this really well is by one, time is always running even if the game is off. Kind of like a Tamagotchi, there's this sense of this character being alive despite very much being just, a character in a video game. Because, once again, the game keeps running, so to say, while the game is off. So, for example, if you leave your character going from one place to another while the game is off, he will do that journey. Or even if you just leave him reading a book, he'll be reading the book when you come back, or maybe you'll have finished reading the book and it's doing something else. Again, much like a Tamagotchi, there's this idea of him being a living character despite obviously not being. And that makes you more attached to him. Shade also controls much like a point and click adventure game, which I think also gives me at least a more perspective of I'm seeing Shade doing things and Shade is kind of this character I'm helping rather than I'm Shade and I'm immersed in this experience in the way that this is me going through the story of the game. Other aspects helping this from a gameplay perspective is also that exploring the cave helps you kind of fill up your room and make it a more cozy place, which also has another advantage gameplay wise, but I'll get into that in a second. At first you simply just want to fill up the character's room because, you want to help him out and you want him to have a nice room. There's that kind of incentive to look nice because at first it does look very bland and kind of boring. Kind of like in a game like Animal Crossing or something. The other advantage is that once you do that, with certain milestones, time within the room of Shade will start running faster. What this means is while Shade is in his room, which is probably where you want to leave him while the game is idle for most of the time will run faster, which means also the time you have to wait, those 400 days, will of course end earlier. I'll say that in my playthrough, by the end of it, when Shade was in his room, time would go 10 times faster. So for each second, it would actually pass 10 seconds on the in-game clock, which is a big deal if you're going for that ending. But that's the thing, there are multiple endings. Like I mentioned earlier, the game really doesn't give you an objective once you begin besides waiting. But as you start finding out more about this cave and about this world, you start finding new opportunities. I personally really wanted Shade to leave the cave, and so that was kind of my goal, and I'll say that I was very happy with how it turned out. But there are other options, some good and some not so good, which also can be very annoying. I definitely think if I had spent the amount of time I did with this game and got a bad ending, I think you would have left a very sour taste in my mouth, especially since you cannot restart or at least not just go back to some kind of checkpoint. It's a game that the developer describes as being meant to be played a single time for a unique experience. Which, I'll be honest, I don't agree with. I think if someone wants to, they should be able to just replay the game or even just go back if they got one of the bad endings. I get what the developer is trying to show or trying to pass on, but in reality I just don't think that translates very well, as once again, I think if I've gotten a bad ending out of this game, I would have been pissed. Regardless, there are ways to restart the game, and that's good, I guess. You just have to delete the save, basically. Regardless though, for the most part, you're not gonna be randomly dying, for example. Nothing is gonna show up, surprise you, and kill you. Usually, when an ending like that comes close, you'll be aware of it and the option will be in your hands. Which, in that way, it does kind of soften the blow of the way this game works. Now, you might still be wondering what this game plays like or what it is like and why it even has a timer in the way that it does, besides, of course, the whole idea that you have to wait that timer out. At least, of course, like I said, if you want to go for that ending. And well, while in the cave, let's just say Shade is not really a very eccentric and energetic type of character. He pretty much walks at a snail pace anywhere he goes, and he's not very physical either. If you want to pass any kind of obstacle, there is usually two options or a mix of two options. The first one is waiting. Some obstacles can only be surpassed by waiting a certain amount of time. Like for example, there will be this set of stairs that is destroyed with a hole in the middle, but then there will also be a stalactite above that hole that will probably fall within a week. Which means that path will open up within a week, right? And that's the way the game kind of forces you to interact with its time mechanics, since you will have to just leave the game be and, move on with your life and come back in a week when that stalactite falls and opens a new area to you. Of course, you can influence this a bit by once again doing some of the other activities that make time flow faster within your room. Things like reading books that you find, drawing paintings with chalk and other materials you find in these caves, lighting a fire, then decorating the room with those same paintings and some glowing crystals you can find, or more specifically mine. Obviously, I don't want to spoil everything, but there's quite a lot of interesting secrets to find in this cave that you can do quite early on, I think. And then after that, it does devolve a bit into, well, now I'm just gonna leave the game be and come back a day or two from now and see what has changed, or come back and get some more materials, since a lot of the materials you can acquire in this game will regenerate once again within a certain amount of time. For example, I definitely caught myself in a habit of coming back each day and checking if a new area was available to me, and then after that I would go and pick up some moth and mushrooms, for example. Despite the very slow traversal at the beginning, it does become a lot more streamlined once you have visited a certain place, because you can set basically a waypoint or a shortcut where once you click on it, the character will just automatically go to that place regardless of where you are. This obviously still takes time and the character still walks very slowly, but it's one of those things where you can just let him do his thing while you're doing something else on the computer. It's definitely a game to play on windowed mode, if you know what I mean. Once again, adding to that Tamagotchi feeling. And I think it works. It makes very small discoveries that in any other game would be very simple or even boring be quite interesting here. Especially if they fit with the goal I specifically made for Shade, which, like I said before, was getting Shade out of the cave. I didn't want to wait those 400 days, especially playing this very much like a reviewer, where I didn't want to be spending any time near those 9600 hours. My actual playthrough of this took about 4 days, with most of the time being spent in the first couple of days really trying to just understand this world and get as much as I could within my limited space. Which helps a lot because then after that, while in the room, time would move a lot faster. As by the time I finished the game, it had passed about 8 days of in-game time, so you definitely do not need to wait the 400 days. And in fact, my experience is probably a much more realistic experience of someone trying to beat this game rather than finding themselves in some sort of routine until the time comes to an end, which would also obviously be an acceptable way of playing this game. And when you look at it through that lens, it's also a lot easier to understand how much content there really is in this game. I will say I saw about 90% of it. I really only missed a couple areas, as this game does have quite a lot of secrets, but I'll be honest, I'm also not one to really be against looking up some of them online. I think it adds to it to just kind of feel a bit of the community as you go online and you try to see what other people have found and kind of add to what you have already found yourself to try and kind of build something or understand the mysteries of the game. You can play the game all by yourself and try and figure out everything in it, but it is one of those games that can be extremely cryptic in a lot of ways. So I definitely prefer the former, as I don't think I would have ever figured out that you can use one of the, and I'm gonna try and say this with minimal spoilers, a mushroom as a trampoline to get over a wall. And even beyond that, it was fun just to, after I finished the game, to see all the small things I had missed or maybe some of the bigger secrets I completely missed. And also just seeing all the other endings, since I definitely was not gonna be playing this game again, I don't think. In that way, I do agree with the developer. This was very much a single experience for me, despite me very much enjoying it. But also, it can be very tedious at times, and I wouldn't want to go through that again. Now, to a more technical side, graphically it does look nice. It's a lot of drawn art, even though Shade himself is a 3D model, even though for the most part you cannot tell. You can really only tell when he turns around to enter a room or something. It's very well done, I think. Overall, it's a very pleasing looking world to look at despite being mostly dark caves. And adding to that is also a really great feeling of ambience. I'm just gonna say it's not music you would listen to, but it's music that really makes you feel like you're alone in a cave. Now, the final thing I want to address is that this game is really not for everyone. I think you have to be aware of what it is and how it works, and in a lot of ways how it's meant to be experienced. It's really not for someone who's just willing to play a short game that can play in an afternoon. It is much more of a game you're meant to pick up once in a while throughout, a few weeks maybe. As I do think that is the way the game is meant to be played, even though I myself actively went for and did beat it in under a week, which you can do as well, and I think you'll enjoy it in that way as well if you want to. I would also recommend not being afraid to go online and trying to look something you don't understand, because it is a game that is for the most part very cryptic. And personally, I think that experience of going online and seeing what other people have figured it out makes for a very interesting shared experience. For that, I would probably recommend then looking up websites like the Steam forums or Reddit rather than just going directly to the wiki or something like that, where you'd more likely just found everything laid out, while on the other ones you're more likely to find people's actual perspective on things, which once again I think that's the way to make this even more interesting of a game. And so for those reasons, and honestly this might be a surprisingly high score, but I don't care, I really enjoyed my experience with this, despite, in a lot of ways it also being a very simple and barren game, if you really want to call it that. Like I said, if you really look at all the content in this game, if you could run at a regular speed and you wouldn't have to wait, you could probably see everything in like a couple of hours. But this is really not that type of game, and it's not meant to be experienced that way. It is a new experience, and for that I really enjoyed it. And so I am giving The Longing an 8 out of 10. Recommendations wise, if you're looking for a different kind of experience, a new experience, and you're willing to be patient and okay with slower games, then I think this is something you want to try out. Especially since, like I said earlier, I do think that the auto-traveling feature of being able to just set a path to a place you already been does streamline things quite a lot, so it doesn't just feel like you're going back and forward at a snail's pace through places you've already been, despite that being exactly what is happening. And at a price of $15, it does feel fair. Obviously, the cheaper the better, but I do think that $15 is fair enough. As far as who shouldn't play this game, well, if you're not willing to put in the time with this game, then it's just not gonna work. Unless you boot it up and then you forget about it, and then you come back 400 days later, then sure, you'll beat the game. There is an option, technically, completely valid option. Regardless though, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, now even disliking, all the things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, also, you should play this game if you're just looking to read Moby Dick. You'll read Moby Dick and also beat a game. I should have probably mentioned that you can actually read the books in this game, but I don't know, I just think it's a small detail that maybe it's best left unsaid. Even though I just said it now at the end of the video, where people probably already clicked off, so that's okay. Yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of people talking about this game on the internet just spoil way too much about it, and I kind of try to avoid that. I'm not saying that I'm better than those people at all, just a preference I have with my reviews. I think people should experience the game by themselves, and I should really just give them an idea of what they're expecting. At least, I hope that's what I'm doing. Anyways, goodbye.